purposes. Our opening panel, from criminal justice practitioner to scholar, paths and perspectives from the concrete blocks to the ivory tower. We will have 4 speakers today in this panel, and the first one is Professor Chuck Russo, who is a professor of criminal justice and the department chair in the Human Justice Program at American Public University System. Professor Russo began his career in law enforcement in 1987 in Central Florida and was involved in all areas of patrol, training, special operations, and investigations before retiring from law enforcement in 2013. Dr. Russo continues to design and instruct courses, as well as act as a consultant for education, government, and industry throughout the world. His recent research and presentations focus on emerging technology and law enforcement applications, post-traumatic stress, agency response to officer suicide, human trafficking, non-government intelligence actors, and online learning. I will now give the floor to Professor Chuck Russo.
Thank you very much, Daniel. What this presentation comes from is, as a department chair, I'm often asked about openings and people seeking employment at the conclusion or towards the end of their career in public safety, whether it's law enforcement, corrections, or probation. And really, there's no easy or simple guidebook for someone to make that transition from employment in the criminal justice system to the world of academia. And, you know, several of us, those of us here who have made that transition, our paths are very varied. And this roundtable brings together individuals who we've all successfully made that transition. And, you know, we've worked from as line officers into positions as faculty members in various universities and leaders in higher education. So what this panel does is we bring together individuals, again, who's made this transition to discuss the various paths that we've taken, the obstacles we've all encountered, and hopefully to provide some tips for success for others who do seek to make this transition at some point, who hopefully look to have a life, you know, after the badge, which at some point will come to its logical conclusion. With that being said, we have, again, Ron Wallace, Nicole Kane, as well as Anthony Galante, who's going to get us started this morning, discussing his path from the badge to academia. Anthony, if you could get us started.
All right, thanks, Dr. Russo. Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Galante, and it is a interesting story, to say the least. Again, everything that I did was not planned, kind of fell into place. But my career in law enforcement really got started right after 9/11, which is kind of an interesting, again, story with that. So I was actually born and raised in New York City, moved down to Florida to do pilot training at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Spent 6 years there, finished up with a bachelor's and a master's degree there, with all of my pilot certificates to be able to fly. So unfortunately, as I was finishing up the master's degree, 9/11 happened. As we all know, the tragedy across the nation and the world that we all experienced. So I had to make a quick pivot, and I pivoted into law enforcement at that point in time. I stayed in Daytona Beach, where I spent the last 19 years as a police officer. Retired back in 2015, and they brought me back on, which I'll explain a little bit further, but they brought me back on as a detective for the unmanned aircraft system, or the drone unit, which I created back in 2012. So that's just kind of the overarching experience that I've had so far. But while at the police department, I was obviously in patrol, and at Daytona Beach, we're about a city of 76,000 here, what I call beds and heads. And then we have about 7 to 8 Super Bowl size events each year. So we're a very robust busy city per se. We have, if you are working patrol, you'll garner a lot of experience. We have about 240 full-time police officers, 350 if you included part-time officers as well. So we are a medium to large police agency here in the Central Florida area. While working for the police department, I have done patrol, which was really the best, one of the best jobs that I've had. Did SWAT for about 7 years. And then I will have to admit that working as on the Marine unit was probably the best job that I had. They basically gave me keys to a boat and I got to work, and a credit card, and said, go have fun. But being on the boat, I got to work with the Coast Guard. I got to work with state agencies, local agencies, and also county agencies as well. So there was a plethora of experience that was out there for me to learn from, which is super important, especially if you want to get into teaching. And then I rounded off the career in the training division, spent the last 6 years or 7 years in the training division, where my love for adult education kind of came into place for that. As I was in the training unit, that's where I got to meet specifically Dr. Russo, who's been kind of a mentor along the way in terms of pushing me and driving me to go back to get education, which is one of the key things that you need if you would like to get into the world of academia in terms of life after the badge. Getting back into that, I went back to school because my master's in aeronautical science and aviation really did not kind of fit in into the criminal justice or homeland security academic world. So I went back and I got a master's degree in criminal justice from American Military University, and I also got a master's degree in homeland security as well. Within a 2-year period. I was kind of driven for it because I really wanted to get into the academic world. Being within the training unit and conducting training for all the high liability for the firearms, defensive tactics, driving the tasers, you name it, I was able to do that and kind of and have that experience in terms of dealing with adult education at that point in time. Having a mentor along the way. A key to success is find somebody who's already done it. Don't recreate the wheel. Find somebody who's already done it and try to listen to them. You don't have to replicate what they do, but try to find the lessons learned from that. That's, to me, was the most important. There's no need to go out there and quote unquote suffer through it or for that. So just try to find somebody that has already done it for that. Some of the easiest, the part of the easiest portion for me in terms of the transition from going from being on the road consistently to academic training. So there's really 2 types. There's brick and mortar or on the ground. So currently I'm a professor, full-time professor with Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University for their unmanned aircraft systems program. I just left the brick and mortar after 6 years on ground, and now I've transitioned to their online worldwide as an associate professor there. So there are huge differences in between the different styles of teaching in terms of being on ground and having constant communication or in-person learning as opposed to sometimes being facilitator online. But some of the easiest stuff was obviously having real world experience. I can't stress that enough. Being a student and also being an instructor or professor within the craft itself, it is imperative that you have experience in the field that you're teaching. And that's what makes the transition easy for us that have actually done the work in the forefront. Some of the hardest things, though, I would have to say is don't put off. So one of the key things that you're going to need is to have that master's degree or to have that PhD. Do not put off your education. Get it done as soon as you possibly can. And once you have it for good. I'm currently in the process. I'm in the last 3 classes of finishing up my PhD in criminal justice and criminology. So I've got 3 classes left. Then my reward is to get to write a book called The Dissertation on my chosen topic. So I had the opportunity, and I wish I would have done it probably about a decade ago, but now I'm paying the price for it. So long story short, when you have the opportunity and the time, and I can guarantee you this, the time will never be right. You have to kind of buckle down and put that sacrifice out there. And I will say that once you do put that sacrifice, it comes back tenfold for it. And a lot of people will talk about, this was something else that I also tell students and those that are trying to get interested. People will look at the cost of going to school and the cost. I look at it as an investment. So if you can get a master's degree for $15,000, $20,000, that is an investment, because once you get hired and get a job, you'll make that $15,000, $20,000 back within the first year. So you kind of have to, it's about your perspective in terms of going into the education field itself. And then finally, in terms of being an effective instructor, being credible, and being validated in terms of the stuff that you teach, or the material that you teach, I have to say, kind of stay in your lane in regard to what have you done in the field. That's why having such a varied background, such as that I have, getting to work in different departments within the police department itself has really prepared me for the criminal justice and homeland security field itself, in terms of working with local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies along the way. So if you have the opportunity within your agency at this point in time to spread, quote unquote, like really spread your wings out and to get all the experience that you possibly can, it translates impeccably into the classroom, number one, and then number two, having that credibility in the classroom and still doing it. For example, I'm still, even though that I'm retired, I'm back as part-time, and I work all the special events, and I run the counter unmanned aircraft system stuff for the agency as well, with the aviation unit. And I'm out there at least once a month, 3 days during that month, 4 days during that month. I also help out the training division as well. So my feet are still in the proverbial fire there, and that experience, I'm still relevant per se, which is super important for the student to actually see as well. So I'll come back in and I'll have videos that I can play and say, hey, look, this is what we did this weekend. And the students truly and really appreciate that. And it's really, really good for the university as well to have active members in the community that of what they're teaching as well. So hopefully that kind of give you some points of interest. And again, I think we're going to save the questions to the end. So thank you for your time, and thanks for listening. Dr. Russo?
Thank you, Anthony. I believe Daniel's going to come up here in a second.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Professor Nicole Kane. She's an associate professor of criminal justice at American Public University System. Dr. Kane has more than 20 years of law enforcement experience as patrol operations, uniform crime scene, COP, and criminal investigations. She is currently assigned to the Criminal Investigations Section's Felony Intake Office and prepares all felony cases for the State Attorney's Office. She recently earned her doctorate in education in organizational leadership. I give the floor now to Dr. Kane.
Hi, thank you, Daniel. I appreciate that introduction. So I've been at American Public University for 11 years. I've been in higher ed for 16 years, and I've been in law enforcement for 22 years. I have an interesting journey. The transition I made from law enforcement to higher ed, kind of like Anthony, I'm still active in law enforcement, and I'll kind of explain that. When I graduated from college with my 4-year degree, I decided to go to the police academy. Initially, I was going to go to law school, but I changed my mind, went to the police academy. I spent about 11 years. I did 6 years in patrol operations and community-oriented policing, where I responded to calls for service. As a community-oriented police officer, I was responsible for the quality of life issues, the crime occurring in my area, and I had to develop problem-solving tactics to address those. I also developed strategies, different strategies to combat crime, whatever that crime was in my area. I listened to my community. I had community meetings where I would actually, listen to what they were telling me and address those issues, as well as, responding to calls for service. Then I transferred over. My goal was always to be an investigator. So I was lucky enough to get that opportunity, and I transferred over to fraud investigations. And I worked fraud for several years, which was interesting. At the time, it was in the early 2000s. The big thing was checks and investigating those type of crimes where people would steal checks out of mailboxes. I had the opportunity to work a couple of real estate schemes, employee thefts, things like that. I had one case where a lady stole, $1 million from a church. She was a church administrator over a period of time. So that was interesting. And I really kind of honed my investigative skills as far as, search warrants, court orders, interrogations, interviews, things like that. And then I moved over to violent crimes, where I spent, I guess it was about 3 years in violent crimes. And I worked robberies, shootings, death investigations, which is suicide, murders. And again, that's intense. I wrote search warrants, arrest warrants, conducted searches, after receiving the okay to do the search warrant, identified evidence, helped collect evidence. I was involved in a lot of complex cases as a violent crimes detective. And during that time, just want to make sure I've got notes. I want to make sure I cover everything. Oh, and testify in court too. I get nervous testifying in court, but that's a great experience to be able to go up there, and you have to, ensure that you're not testifying to things you're not supposed to. It's pretty intense to testify, and also do surveillance operations and things like that. But while I was a detective, there was a master's program at a local school, and I'm from Central Florida, like Anthony. I'm in the Central Florida area, and I earned my master's degree. It was a program that kind of catered to law enforcement, and those are the programs to look for if you are interested in that transition. And it was every other weekend, and it was in person. So I earned my master's degree in criminal justice administration. And at the time, online learning was really booming. There was a real opportunity there to be able to stay in law enforcement. And, at the time, I thought I would dabble in teaching to supplement my law enforcement salary. And another professor here at American Public University, Dr. Weiss, she was kind of a mentor. Anthony mentioned having a mentor, and she was working in online teaching. She was at American Public University. She kind of encouraged me. So like I said, I kind of dabbled in online teaching, and I never intended to love it. I never intended that, but I did. I loved teaching. So I left law enforcement after 11 years to pursue a full-time career in higher ed. So I did that. I was fortunate to get hired on at American Public University full-time. I'm an assistant professor now. And so, while I was out of law enforcement for about 4 years, so I really, this kind of goes to that transition period. I took the opportunity to take classes on, teaching, how to teach. That was the big, the challenge. And then I got the opportunity, and I'll go more into that in a minute, but I got the opportunity after 4 years, which was just before my credentials for law enforcement would have expired. I just met it. I was just before I was going to have to take the academy again, go through the academy again. The agency I retired from asked me if I would come back in a part-time capacity as an investigator. So at the time too, my son was going into kindergarten, so it was a perfect opportunity. So I went back. Initially, I was working violent crimes, which was a little intense, with my full-time job, obviously at APIS, and trying to navigate that. So I moved over to felony intake, which is where I'm at now. And that was 2011. So I've been back in law enforcement for 11 years, part-time, flexible schedule, just work a few days a week. But it kind of immerses me in the profession still. So that was kind of my path, the master's, and then, dabbling in the teaching and realizing that this is something I can do, and I can be good at it. So like I said, I left law enforcement and kind of switched, my full-time higher ed, now part-time law enforcement officer. Let's see, sure. And then I also, in 2020, earned my doctorate degree in organizational leadership. So, I think part of being an educator is committing to lifelong learning. I don't know everything. I don't claim to know everything. And I make a point to learn something every day. That's why it's so important, I think, to train, whether, it's simple things like, effective grading, effective feedback, content, making content engaging and appropriate for adult learners, because, teaching is different from being a police officer. You have to learn how to teach. And I made a point to do that. So I think through on-the-job training and meeting at APIS, the opportunities they offer for training, Research, did a lot of research, especially with my dissertation. I think learning how to research helps you be a better educator, and then you can provide those tools to your students as well. I took advantage of learning opportunities, trial and error. I learned how to teach. I learned how to teach the adult learner. I do try to provide that develops critical thinking, research prowess. I think that's so important, and that's benefited me as obviously an educator, but also as a law enforcement officer. Engaging in timely instruction. I like to provide valuable learning activities and, of course, fair and measurable assessments. And again, you know, I use within our discussion boards because I teach online. So the discussion board is kind of that in the class tries to mirror that in the class engagement. So I use Socratic dialogue. I provide them opportunities for self-directed learning. Share the big thing too is shared experiences. At APUS, we have a lot of military students, older students, where and students that are in law enforcement. And I should of course share my experiences, and I ask them to share theirs too. I think that's important. I think adults really latch on to that. So I think the benefits to the student and to the organization or the institution is it's an asset. Certainly the opportunity to immerse myself in law enforcement again has been an asset to my students and to the institution. I think because I can speak to crime and quality of life issues, like what's going on right now, crime trends, like the rising crime that we're seeing, opioid abuse and deaths, that's here. That's in my community. I've done research on that. I've done presentations on that. And I think being able to see like what's actually happening, participate in training initiatives. We've done de-escalation tactics, and that's a big talking point right now as far as police reform, doing things better. Critical incident management, active shooter training. Obviously, active shooters, mass shootings are an issue, and we learned that. I have to go through all the police training every year. Also, the emerging technology in law enforcement, body-worn cameras. My agency is going to body-worn cameras. I'll be issued one. I'll know how it works. I'll know how that, the storage issues, the cost issues, all of that. I'll be able to have that information live and be able to, kind of share that with my students. And then intelligence-led policing, that's kind of a direction. I think that with community-oriented policing is kind of the trend right now. Forensic genealogy, which is another emerging technology. And then, of course, critical issues, recruitment and retention. That's what I did my dissertation on. It's a huge issue, and the differences in generations, Generation X versus millennials versus Generation Z, and those differences in how we recruit and retain them, how we lead them. It's different. So, and leadership issues, building diverse police agencies, that's an issue. We need more, Blacks, Hispanics, women in law enforcement. And of course, improving and community relations is extremely important. And I think my agency specifically is doing that. I think you see that around the country. But again, I think being there and living that is beneficial to my students. And as Anthony mentioned, I can share those experiences. I can talk to them, or not talk, but in an online environment, provide them with real life information. But the cases that I've been involved in, and you mentioned videos and things like that. I think that's valuable to the student. And really being a past or present criminal justice practitioner who teaches criminal justice courses adds credibility to the instruction. There's no question about that. It illuminates the topics by providing practical application through storytelling. So I'm able to really show, depending on what the topic is, I can show the students, this is how it works in the real world. This is the practical application of this, this particular, topic you're learning about. So I think it's a huge asset. And like Anthony mentioned, the education, that's obviously you have to have at least a master's to teach. So if it's something you're considering, definitely start it, because it's a tough process. The master's took me 2 years, and the doctorate, the ED took 5 years. So it was tough because I was, obviously working full time. I have a family and all that. So you have to balance it, but get started. It's a great asset. I think I love the fact that I'm in both worlds. I'm immersed in both worlds, and I'm thriving. So that's all. Thank you.
Daniel, I believe you're muted.
No, we still can't hear you.
Okay, I believe Daniel's muted. This is Chuck. Thank you, Nicole, for that contribution. And with that being said, we'll go to Ron, Dr. Ron Wallace.
All right, thank you very much, Chuck. I started my career. I tell people my career actually has taken a three-phase approach. I've been in criminal justice. It was 39 years this past summer. And the first phase of my career, I was actually an adult probation parole officer. And I did that kind of work in North Carolina for approximately 6.5 years. Actually, and with probation and parole, the great thing is you get exposure, especially I know I did here in North Carolina because we were certified law enforcement officers. We got exposure to law enforcement. We got exposure to courts because we were in the courtroom every week. And then, of course, we got exposure to the corrections aspect of it because we would sometimes as parole officers have to go into the prisons. So I did that for 6.5 years. I then went over and started working as a parole case analyst at the North Carolina Parole Commission. I was there for 5 years. And my last 1.5, 2 years there, we were doing a technology project where we were automating our offender management system. And for the Parole Commission, we had very limited technological capabilities at that point. And this was going to take our system fully online. So I was sent down as the liaison to that project for the Parole Commission and basically helped design that part of the system for the paroling authority. Near the end of that project, after about 11.5 years in state government, which is typically when a state employee is like, okay, I'm committed now, I'm staying, a couple of the consulting firms that were working on the technology project started talking to me about the possibility of coming over and working with them. So at about 11.5 years into my career, I went into what I call phase 2, where I went out and joined a big consulting company. I was sent around the country to different Department of Corrections to go in and look at their existing business practices, how they were doing things, and how they might want to realign their practices in preparing for a implementation of an automated offender management system. Now, eventually, I also expanded out and started doing some projects with integrated justice, where we were dealing with state police, courts, and corrections. So I did that for a while. And then for a little bit, I went out actually on my own and did a little consulting, but it wasn't long before a private company up in Louisville, Kentucky that did an automated victim notification system. They were actually only 2 years in existence at that point. They contacted me about coming to work for them. And so I was there with them for about 7 years as director of product management. And in that role, I was all over the country, traveling, going out visiting jails, prisons, sheriff's departments, court systems. We got into some stuff with probation parole. We were working with victims groups. So it allowed me some exposure to a lot of different agencies and the way they do things across the country. I did that, as I mentioned, for about 7 years. And I kind of hit what I call the glass ceiling there. I know I had gotten some advice one time early in my consulting career. I had the opportunity to share a taxi while I was in Washington, D.C. with the individual that had established the 911 system in Chicago. And during that brief taxi ride, I took the advantage of asking him what would he consider his key to being successful. And the advice he had given me was, you have to keep changing what you're doing professionally. He said, the person who for 20 years does the same thing, when that 20 years is over and they decide they want to do something different, he asked me, what are people going to be willing to hire them to do? And I was like, well, the same thing. He said, exactly. They're only going to be willing to hire them because that's all they've ever done. He said, every 2 to 3 years, you should be looking for an opportunity to add to your skill set of what you're doing. He said, I'm not saying you need to leave a company or whatever, but look for opportunities to go in and try new things. And after you've done new things a couple of times, then when you go apply somewhere, people are going to be willing to take the chance on you because they'll see your track record. And so I kind of took that to heart. And when I hit that glass ceiling at the company up there, I actually was encouraged by a couple of other large companies that I had the expertise at that point to go out as what they called a hired gun, where basically I subcontracted to them. And I did that for 2.5 years. Again, going back out, working on some of these automated offender management systems with corrections, law enforcement being both the local sheriffs, the state police, did a little bit in with the federal police. And at that point, after I had done that for 2.5 years, I started thinking, okay, I need to start thinking about what's going to be my next phase in my career. I had a bachelor's degree from way back right before I became a probation officer. And while I was working at the company, the private company up in Louisville, my wife had encouraged me to go back and get my MBA degree. So I had that. And my wife had actually been teaching online. She's in nursing. I thought, okay, that'd be a great thing I could eventually do. And I started asking around about it, and a lot of the universities were like, well, you know, you've got this wealth of experience that we would like to have for our students. But our problem is you don't have any education in criminal justice, even though you've got this vast amount of experience. So I decided I didn't want to go back and get another master's degree. I decided instead I would go back and get my PhD. And about the same time, my wife had decided to get her PhD in nursing education. So I started working on that. Now, while I was working on that, I had the opportunity to join a large company and go out to California. And the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation was in the process of implementing a new offender management system. So I went out and I actually was able to lead a team of about 50 individuals where we were going in looking at their business processes, what they need to do to change them, to align with this new system coming in. I was overseeing the organizational change management. Other words, what would we need to do to change the culture? And then also I oversaw the teams that developed the training to deliver the system. And I was out there for about 3 years on that project. Now, I had started teaching a little bit online in 2007, and I managed to complete my PhD in 2011. And at that point, I was ready to transition over to, the third phase of my life, academia. So in 2012, I joined American Military University, where the four of us are from. At first, I was an adjunct, and then eventually, after a year or two, I was hired on as an associate professor, and that's where I have been since. I think the easiest part of my transitioning in these roles was that I was used to change. I was used to changing from one environment to another, adapting to it. So that made it easy for me. I was able to move through the phases of my career and then eventually into academia. I would say the most difficult part of the transition is actually getting your foot into the world of academia. Something I encountered early on, as I mentioned, was people are like, well, you've got all this vast experience, but you have no education, you have no experience teaching. Everybody wanted the experience teaching. And I was fortunate that I found a university that was literally, they needed someone so badly that even though I didn't have the education or experience, they were willing to bring me on board. And I taught with them for about 2 or 3 years. That got me the experience I needed. And so that then when I started going and applying to places like American Military, I had the experience that was needed. So that was probably the most difficult part of my transition, was making sure I had that educational background and the teaching experience, the online teaching experience. And some of the things I feel like I bring to the students in the university are that I have experienced both the brick and mortar. I mean, back in the day when I got my undergraduate degree, that was the only option. There was no online learning. There was no internet back then. I mean, we thought we were fancy when we would go over and hand in some punch cards at the computer processing center and then come back 2 or 3 hours later, and they give us a big ream of paper for printout of what the program we had run. So that was, I've had that experience. But then also for my master's and my doctorate degree, I do those online because my jobs at that time, I traveled a lot across the country, so I couldn't go in a traditional brick and mortar. I also had to balance the work life, the academic life, of studying as a student, and my personal life. And I know that's something a lot of times when I have students who are feeling a little bit down or like they're being overwhelmed with what they're having to do in the courses, I will remind them that, balancing personal, professional, and academic life can be challenging at times. However, they've accepted this challenge by deciding to improve themselves through education. So, I mean, I just feel like that's the view they have to go in with it. And that's something I bring to them. Also, the benefit I bring is I've had this vast experience of going in and seeing agencies across the nation. So I know a lot of what they're experiencing. As a matter of fact, some of them will talk about they work at certain prison facilities. I've been to that prison facility. I know I've been fortunate to go into places like San Quentin, Folsom, the big prisons here in North Carolina, some up in Massachusetts, Texas. I mean, I have been in the big prisons there, and then the jails I've been in across the country. So I'm able to actually understand what they're going through so that I can turn things and relay it more into things they understand. So, and with that, I think I'll hand it back off to Dr. Russo.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate that. Let me give you a little bit about me and my transition, which, as hopefully by hearing the four of us, you'll see there are some similarities, but a lot of differences as well. I was first sworn as a law enforcement officer back in 1987. I retired in 2013, so my career spanned across 4 decades. I tell folks I came in with crack cocaine, and basically I left with Black Lives Matter. That pretty much frames it. Unfortunately, when I retired, it wasn't on my own choice. I was injured in 2011, and after a couple of surgeries and lots of rounds of PT, my body, the older we get, you just don't bounce back, and I unfortunately had to medically retire, so it wasn't much of a choice. But with my path, I was working on my bachelor's degree back in the early 90s. When I first got sworn in, I had my AA, but that was it, and quickly realized I needed to get back to school, because if I wanted to get promoted, if I wanted to get the transfers I wanted, if, God forbid, I got hurt and had to retire, I needed an education. So I was working motors, and I was going back to school, working on my bachelor's degree in criminal justice, because back then that was the only degree I could actually finish, primarily going at night, because there weren't internet courses, there weren't online. And I was taking a police technology course with an instructor who was retired NYPD, who retired in the 60s. And because I was in motors, the bike was assigned to me, so I would go straight from work to campus in uniform on the bike. And I was like usually one or two uniform cops in class. So he knew, I was a uniformed officer. And there were times with this police technology course where he would ask me, hey, do you have access to this piece of equipment? Or do you have this? Yeah, sure. Or can you bring this? Yeah. So I went into explaining some of the technology that either he didn't have access to or he never dealt with. And I kind of ended up teaching part of the course. And I realized, heck, he can do this. Apparently I can do this. Maybe this could be an option. Around that same time, I started getting more involved with training at my agency. And thank God I was working for an agency that had a great tuition reimbursement program. And I also had a chief who at the time, I was the only one in my entire agency going to school. And he pulled me aside and said, look, I'd rather give you the money than give it back to the city. So I'll give you, I'll pay for your books. I'll pay for your parking decal. I'll pay whatever it is. Just keep going to school. So as I was wrapping up my bachelor's degree, he's go find a graduate degree. I'll pay for that too. Which, okay, I may be a little crazy, but I'm not stupid. I'm not going to turn that down. So I started looking to graduate degrees, and I found a program that really clicked with me. And it was a Master's of Education in Instructional System Design, which is training design. It just seemed to things just seemed to start falling into place. So it was a degree for instructional designers and training specialists. For me, it was a perfect fit. So I was doing that program, doing well with that master's degree. And I was wrapping that one up, I got a call from the chair of the Criminal Justice Department. And he said, hey, do me next time you're on campus, swing by my office. Yeah, sure. Which I was always in contact with him from when I was in class, because again, being one of a few uniform cops on campus, that was just normal. Him and I hit it off. Excuse me 1 second. I have some feedback. Okay. So, and he always took an interest in me, and, from being law enforcement, because he came from a corrections background. So him and one other professor, who I'll mention later, kind of encouraged me with the educational pursuits. So I came on campus and met with him in his office, and he's like, I need a favor of you. Okay. He's, is your agency still paying for your college and such? Yeah, sure. It's like, well, I need you to take another master's degree. Our response is, what are you, crazy? I'm just wrapping this one up. He's like, well, I'm starting a criminal justice master's, and I need somebody in there I know who's going to graduate. I need a win. I can waive 2 courses. You give me 4 semesters, I can get you another, you get you another master's degree. It's not going to cost you anything, right? I said, no. It's like, can you help me out? Thank God I said yes. So, because I'm really grateful for it, because it kind of set me up for everything I had, everything that's coming. So I got a second master's degree and master's degree in criminal justice. And it just opened the doors. And I've been running with this stuff ever since, because as I was wrapping up that second master's degree, he was tasked by his university president to see if this whole education, if the internet thing could work for education. Now, this is in the mid-90s now, back when AOL was still charging by the hour, and if you had a 14.4 dial-up modem, you were flying. The reason why they picked the criminal justice program at this university to figure out if this internet thing could work for education was because it was the most demographically diverse program they actually had on the campus. So they figured if it could work for this program, it could work for any of them. So he got tasked with this, and he gave me a call and said, hey, I need you to come by the office when you're on campus again. So he called me in the office and he said, look, here's what I got a problem, and I need your help. Okay, what do you got? And he explained that he was tasked with this to try to figure this out. And he said, look, my faculty, they can't pull this off. He said, you're the best shot I have. You got the master's in education. You got the you're almost done with the master's in criminal justice. You got the experience in criminal justice. You can teach for my program. You're willing to give it a shot. And my response was, well, is it a paying gig? He said, yeah. I said, yeah, sign me up. And what happened was there were several of us around the country trying to work on this whole internet education thing at the same time. And about 5 or 6 of us kind of came upon the same model at the same time, and it's one that pretty much most of the universities now use. Myself and a couple, 1 or 2 people on the West Coast, person up in the Northeast, we all kind of came upon the same model using discussion boards and this format that, again, most of the universities use. And I've been running with it ever since. So, Bernie McCarthy was the department chair, and forever grateful. Just the things that, the doors that it opened, because for the last 25 years, I've been living a great life because of it. So, I helped him out, and later on he helped me out because I was working for the department, for the university, and working for my police department at the same time. And they started a PhD program, and I was accepted into the first cohort. And he called me in the office and said, "Look, payback time. No longer are you an adjunct faculty, you're now a graduate teaching assistant. We will give you more money for the courses you teach, and we're covering your PhD. So all you have to do is pay for your dissertation hours." So again, very grateful. And my transition again was very, very strange because I had 2 full-time careers, and both knew about the other one. I was a full-time police officer as well as a full-time college faculty for Research One. Both thought that that one helped the other one and brought benefit to the other one, and both actually signed off on it. The police department would give me administrative time off to do conferences, to do university research. If I had a course that I had to teach and I was scheduled for like a road assignment or something, I wouldn't have to take vacation time. The university thought it was wonderful that I would actually show up in uniform and teach, because it brought the real world right into the classroom. So everyone thought it was a benefit. It was a really good thing, and it was great for me. Having 2 incomes was rather nice. Now with the transition, for me, believe it or not, the easiest part, which I would have never imagined this, was being in demand for research projects that involved interviews with law enforcement officers. Again, I was with a Research One, with a major university that was primarily a research university, and the quote unquote true academics would actually seek me out to include me in their research projects whenever it would be required to either interview or speak with law enforcement officers. Because the officers generally would not speak with the academics, but they'd be happy to speak with me. I was involved in the academies in Central Florida for many years, so I trained many of the officers in the area. I used to teach advanced specialized courses. So a lot of folks in Central Florida knew of me, knew of my courses. So if I was going into a Central Florida agency, chances are I knew at least several people there. And if I was doing interviews, working for the university, representing the university, the officers would actually talk to me. Where if one of the academics went there, they wouldn't talk to the academics. And which was really, really interesting. And I still have credibility, and I still do some work on behalf of some of the quote unquote true academics. Again, cracking the difficult audiences for them. Never saw that coming, and never imagined that would be an interesting angle to work in regard to the transition. But it became very, very helpful for myself as well as for the quote unquote true academics. The difficult part of the transition was initially getting that credibility from those true academics. I was one who quote unquote got their hands dirty. I wasn't viewed as one of them, and I was often held in lower status in the academic circles in those initial faculty meetings I would go to. However, because I was in such demand on some of these research projects, my academic accomplishments and credentials rapidly dwarfed theirs. My academic resume, my CV, is like at this point, like 20 pages long. I'm a full professor and have been for quite some time. And my academic credentials has rapidly surpassed many of the quote unquote true academics at that research one. So the initial difficult part has gone away because I was able to capitalize on that that easy part of that transition. Again, never thought that, never crossed my mind that that would be something that just being able to having that credibility with law enforcement officers, with corrections officers, and doing research would be that valuable to where they would actually seek me out and bring me into research projects, and my name would be on all these, this peer-reviewed research, and so much of it to where I was able to move up in academic rank very, very quickly. Now, as a practitioner scholar, and the way it benefited the students, in my view, and the institutions, I was able to link real world examples with the theories that are found in the textbooks. I brought stuff in fresh off the street as I concurrently ran both careers as an academic in higher education and as a uniformed officer. I would again come into the classroom straight off the street and end up teaching in uniform sometimes. Students appreciated my ability to tie in those academic theories discussed in the textbooks with the real world examples experienced on the street. So I'm able to, I was able to demonstrate the relevance of the content. And in my opinion, it aids in the retention. It aids in connecting those dots. Now, as a department chair, I don't teach as much as I used to. Most of my duties, unfortunately, are more administrative. And I'm no longer with the research one. I'm with American Public University System now, where we're a fully online university. But when I do teach for us, even though it's online, I'm teaching from my third bedroom in my home. Even on the discussion boards, though, I could still connect the dots and take the real world examples that I still have cataloged and memorized, and bring them to life on our discussion boards and in our chats and in the various sessions, and using the methods of communication, electronic communications that we do have. So while I may not be standing in front of the students anymore, in uniform, I'm still able to convey those messages and connect those dots and create those linkages so that you can take the theory and demonstrate the real world significance to it. And I do believe it does help. It also helps with, here at American Public University System, so many of our students are military or public safety and related. Either they're in the field or they're a significant other or someone who's in the field. And that helps with the credibility of the faculty member. With my department, 85% of my faculty are public safety professionals. So, we bring the real world right into the classroom, and I do believe it helps. Now, hopefully, our transitions, the four of us here, demonstrate that there's not one common path to go from practitioner to scholar. There are lots of different ways to go from point A to point B, and oftentimes it's a scenic route. There's no one, flip a switch and just jump. It's a long, windy road. But a few common themes. When a door opens, jump through it. It helps having a mentor. For me, Bernie McCarthy, David Mose, who was an inspector for Chicago PD, and prior to that, one of the Tuskegee Airmen during World War II. I owe my career to those two. It helps having people like that. But just, if really, when a door opens, by all means, run through it. There is a life beyond the badge, trust us. And could be one for you as well. Thank you. Daniel?
Thank you, Chuck. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great, great.
Thank you. One of the things you were talking about, the difficulty in being recognized as a legitimate scholar in the academic community. That leads us to our first question today by Mike Gray. This question is to all the panelists. And can you talk about some of the biggest challenges you've encountered moving from practitioner to scholar in these types of academic fields?
Anyone want to catch that one?
Well, I think just as Chuck mentioned, being taken seriously as a scholar. And like I mentioned before, I think my biggest challenge was, learning to teach. Just because I'm a police officer and, I have expertise in that particular field doesn't mean I know how to teach it. So seizing that opportunity and taking advantage of resources to, learn how to teach, and also accepting that lifelong learning, and as several of us have mentioned, having a mentor that can kind of help with that. But yeah, I think that's, the biggest challenge, and ensuring that, well, as Chuck mentioned, seizing opportunities, you have to do that. And just ensuring that you're ready for that transition too.
I mean, I would echo that also, all that also. I mean, and as Chuck said, you can't be afraid to seize the opportunities when they present themselves. So if you have the opportunity to try something new, you need to go ahead and give it a shot. That was probably one of the biggest challenges for me, was not being afraid to take on the new challenges that came with transitioning over to academia from practitioner and consultant, things of that nature. Being able to go out there and not be afraid to tell people how you view it, and because if you do that, eventually you do get the credibility that you're seeking from these individuals.
Thank you. Our second question from John Schmidt, for all the panelists too. Considering you have all been practitioners, what would you say might be some shortcomings of law enforcement and criminal justice academic programs that might benefit from practitioners' perspectives? And are there any ways in which you would generally try to improve such programs?
I can probably do a good shot at this one, I believe. I've been active in that. Let me give you an example. I've been department chair now for 7 years at APUS. When I first took over as this role, we had a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice that was focusing on violent crime forensics. And we really weren't doing a good job. It was very unfortunate. And the program was just, in my opinion, just poor. And with violent crime forensics, the academies and such are really doing a good job with most individuals know how to lift fingerprints, most know to look for blood evidence and such. We were actually preparing people for the jobs of yesterday. So we took the opportunity to take that Bachelor of Science degree, change it to prepare students and individuals for the jobs of today and tomorrow. And we took it from violent crime forensics and we changed it to basic digital forensics, to where that degree path now focuses on zeros and ones. It's all digital forensics, which agencies are so neat. I was a background investigator and ran background investigations for many years for the agency. So I know what agencies were looking for as far as the new recruits and the applicants. And I know, and my team knew, that if we ever had somebody with a cyber background, with digital forensics background, we start processing that person that day. So, what can we do to prepare, the individual to be that outstanding applicant for that agency? And one of it is, let's prepare people for the jobs of today and tomorrow, not the jobs of yesterday. We know if a student goes to an academy a law enforcement academy, they're going to be told how to lift, they're going to be shown how to lift a fingerprint. They're going to be trained properly in that. We don't have to do that anymore. But it's very difficult for the recruits to get training in the cyber, in the digital. We can help them with that, and we are helping them with that. So there are several things such as the digital forensics, another way that we can assist with the academic programs is giving them, you know, again, that theory to practice, connecting those types of dots. So that may help them, that if they do go into the field, give them more tools in the toolbox. Another example is we also have, as one of the area of concentration that our graduates, when they're earning their bachelor's degree, they can take is entrepreneurship, which is a bit uncommon if you think of a criminal justice degree. But if we look at what we're asking those involved in problem-oriented policing, those involved in community policing to think, and how they're asked to solve problems, and we look at what is involved in an entrepreneurship program, it's similar trains of thought, similar thinking. It's somewhat unconventional based upon what and how we've trained in the past, but it's the same basis. We're asking them to think, you know, creatively solve problems, reach conclusions using different means than we've done in the past. So it actually fits in, again, preparing the recruit, preparing the graduate for the problems they're facing today and tomorrow. So it just requires thinking a bit differently, seeing what we've done in the past, but thinking about what they're facing today and what they're going to be facing tomorrow. And unfortunately, I don't think enough programs are doing that. And I think we need to be working in that manner.
Thank you, Chuck. Do any of the other panelists wish to add to that?
Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for such a great panel. This was very informative. I'm sure a lot of the people watching would be interested to know your experiences. Some of them may be looking to make that transition, so this was very useful. Remember that all the sessions will be recorded and will be posted in the program. We'll send a note to everyone for watching the videos post-conference. And we look forward to seeing you in our next sessions. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.